Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode in the teaching series. Hey, I hope you are having a great day whenever you are watching this, and I hope that, like all these teachings, there's something in here that really has a big impact on you. This particular lesson that we're going to talk through today has been really significant in my life. And so generally when you are a teacher of something, if it's impacted you in a big way, you're like hoping that it really reaches people in their story as well. So today's teaching comes from Isaiah chapter 2. And Isaiah was a prophet about 700 years before the time of Jesus. He is ministering in the southern kingdom known as Judah with the capital of Jerusalem. And in Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah gets this vision for the future. And it would be really fun to tackle the vision at some point, but I'm interested in something that shows up very early in chapter 2. So Isaiah chapter 2 verse 1 says this, "This is what Isaiah son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it." And then it just goes on from there, and it's just an astounding vision he gets. What I'm interested in is the phrase, "in the last days." And this phrase starts off verse 2. Now, depending upon whatever translation you may be looking at, yours may say what mine says, in the last days. Perhaps it'll say in the latter days. But some translations even have in the future days, because we're talking about something down the line. But literally in Hebrew, this is how it reads, in the behind days. Again, Isaiah is talking about the future here, and yet he talks about that in the behind days, which is really confusing for us, right? Because when we talk about the future, we talk about facing the future, like walking into the future. But Isaiah says, no, the future is actually the behind days, which is Isaiah's way of saying you face the past. And you go, well, why would anybody do that? Well, there's a very important word that shows up over and over and over again in the scriptures, and it's God using this word, and he's saying to his people, zakar, zakar, zakar. It's this Hebrew word that means remember, remember, remember. Where God will say, remember how I rescued and redeemed you from your slavery in Egypt. Remember how I took care of you during that vulnerable time in the desert for 40 years. Remember what I have asked you to do. So God is always telling the Israelites, remember, remember, remember. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. And the idea is that if you turn your face to the future, it's almost like this way of saying that you are neglecting or forgetting your past. You're forgetting your story. And in the Bible, if you forget your story, you have no future. And so Isaiah says you turn around and you don't live in the past, but you orient yourself to the past because by nature, the future is really fuzzy. It's nebulous, like we have a hard time figuring out what is to come. Indeed, we don't know fully what is to come. We only sometimes guess correctly in parts. And what can happen is that if we face the future and our attention is there, we can easily get wigged out. Like we can just have all of this anxiety and fear rises up in us. That thing hasn't even happened yet, and yet it is affecting us fundamentally today. The future is hard to get your hands around, isn't it? So what Isaiah is saying here is that when you turn around and you face the past, you do that so that you can recall all of the ways that God has met you in your story. And when you are reminded, this is a God who has met me at this time and this time and this time, it gives you confidence to move into the future with your back to it. And this is what's so cool, because essentially what Isaiah is admonishing us to do is we are called to live back to the future. Right? 2,700 years before Michael J. Fox. I mean, Michael J. Fox has nothing on the prophet Isaiah. And so Back to the Future, this is like the real Back to the Future, the first time Back to the Future, which is you want to have your Back to the Future so that you can be reminded of all the ways God met you here. And when you do that, you will have the confidence to walk backwards into the future, because the same God who met you here is the same God who is waiting for you over here. And friends, God's got your back. Just don't lose sight of all the ways that he has met you in your story. Isn't that a really cool concept? Now, this is how this has impacted me, is that many of you know that I got to serve as a teaching pastor for more than a decade back in Michigan. And most recently, I was at a phenomenal church for 4 years in West Michigan that I absolutely loved. And loved the staff, loved the people, just a wonderful place to be. My family loved West Michigan. My kids loved their school. And yet it was August, so not this past August, but the August before, where my wife Shalyn and I had this 2-week time period where at the end we looked at each other and we said, we don't understand this, but we're supposed to resign and move to Nashville. Now, some of you are thinking, how did you hear God clearly? And how did you know it was Nashville? And we don't have time to go into all of that. But in that 2-week time period, like Nashville kept coming up over and over again, and these crazy things were happening. And my wife and I had no idea before these 2 weeks that anything was changing. But in talking with mentors and dear friends, it was like abundantly clear to everyone that we were supposed to go to Nashville. Again, I'd never been to Nashville before. And yet we made that decision. And we had a 3-month transition at the church, and then we ended up moving to Nashville. We've been to in the greater Nashville area now for just over a year. And I can tell you that 9 months into being here, we still didn't have a clue why we were here. So the 3-month transition at my church, the 9 months here, it had been an entire year. And it was only about 5 months ago where all of these ideas came together for making Walking the Text a formal nonprofit. We've submitted tax exemption status. We're waiting on that, to put together the ebook, the teaching series, to rebuild the website. All of that just came in the last 5 months or so. But prior to that, we were here for 9 months and back in Michigan for 3 months in transition and having no idea what God was doing. And I can tell you, it was maddening. It was frustrating. It was like I could not get my mind around, why did God bring us here? And by the way, Nashville's a really cool area, by the way. So it's nothing against Nashville, and we love it here now. It's just the fact that we just didn't know why God pulled us out of a place that we knew and loved and brought us here. And it was like on certain days where I'm trying to figure out the future. I can't get my hands wrapped around it. It's just fuzzy and it's gray and just going nuts. There were moments where I would just get really frustrated. And just this sense of like, man, God, what are you doing? And I felt like in those moments, God said to me, Brad, the problem is you're facing the wrong direction. This isn't for you to know yet. I've got this figured out. But what I need you to do is turn your back to the future and be reminded of all the ways that I have met you in your story, and be reminded that I know what I am doing, and in due time you will understand what is behind you. But I need you to walk with confidence backwards into the future, because you are being reminded of the ways in which I have met you in your story. And it was like, okay, I can take a deep breath. Yes, God is right. Generally, God is right. And I could just relax a little bit. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't plan for the future. It doesn't mean that you don't kind of swing your head around and go, okay, I need to try to figure out what's going on. It's just that you don't completely turn your face to the future, that you orient yourself to the past. You don't live in the past, but you allow your story in your past and how God has met you to give you the confidence you need to join God in the future, who's already got your back, who's already there, and will take care of you once you arrive. And so this was huge for me. And I know that this has also been something that people talk about who may not have much of a religious background or affiliation. Take, for example, Steve Jobs. I remember watching in 2005 his Stanford commencement speech. And by the way, this has been viewed more than 50 million times. It has been one of those talks that has just resonated with millions and millions and millions of people. And it's only like 16 minutes long. He talks about doing what you love. That's kind of like his big idea. And in the midst of that, he tells 3 different stories. And in one of the stories, he's talking about all of these events that happened in his past that he didn't understand. And then he said, I came to a moment where I recognized something. He said, and it just changed so much. He says, you can't connect the dots going forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. Now, Steve wasn't a professing follower of Jesus, but I believe that this is how God works in all of our lives, whether we acknowledge God or not. Like, God is not this God that's like, well, unless you believe in me and, profess a certain thing, then I'm not going to help you. No. Like, the biblical story is that God is good to all people, that God loves all people, and God is working in everyone's story, whether we acknowledge it or not. But apparently more than 50 million people have been compelled by this observation, which I think just speaks into this reality in life, because we all have this sense of, I don't know what the future is all about. Like, we all can get wigged out and feel this sense of anxiety and fear when we're just facing the future. But when we can turn around and recognize that all of these dots have connected, that God's hand has been all over that, it can give you what you need to be fully present now. Because oftentimes when we face the future, it pulls us out of the present. Like, something that has not happened is messing with us here, and we're not fully present to our work, or we're not fully present to the task at hand. We're not fully present to our family because our mind is just running for all the things that are going to have to happen in the future or that we're concerned about, and we don't live well now. And God's invitation is, trust me. Trust me, make the right steps now, make the right decisions today. Be reminded of all the ways that I have met you. The future will take care of itself. God's got your back. He will meet you there. And you can live fully present now because your face is to the past. So I don't know how that hits you. I don't know what you're resonating with, but I know that for many of us, we feel that gray, nebulous future that just messes with us. And I hope that you find this to be really helpful. And maybe for some of you, you just, after this teaching, or you kind of make out a few times this next week where you just sit down and you go, God, what are all the things that are pulling me out of the present? Where have I forgotten my story? God, show me where you're meeting me in my past, where you've met me there, and give me the confidence I need so that I can live well in the present and I can walk backwards into the future, knowing, God, that you are already there waiting for me and everything is going to be just fine. However you define that. So friends, I hope that's helpful to you. And thank you so much for watching the teaching. And if you're watching this anywhere other than at walkingthetext.com, you could head over to Walking the Text and go into the teaching series, and you can find this teaching, and it will be listed as the last one. You can leave comments. There are discussion questions to go deeper for personal study, for group study. If you just know someone who just needs to hear this teaching today, just share that with them, and may you walk out the text well in your life.